Summer of '41 we came down. Yep. Yeah.
How many generations of your family have lived in Hanson?
You're looking at them. Just us.
You and your parents?
Yeah, because my mother and father grew up in Roxbury, in Boston, and they lived in 101 Cabot Street in Boston, which is no longer there because the Boston Redevelopment Authority took over all those they were 3-decker houses and stuff like that, and they demolished all the houses and stuff like that, and then they put up supposedly low-cost housing for people and stuff like that. But so they came from Roxbury, and then they got married in Roxbury, and then they moved down. I don't know where they moved to, and my grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side, their name was Anderson, and my mother, and of course her mother and father, they were born in Norway.
Oh, really?
And they were born in Norway, and my mother was born in Norway, and she came to this country when she was about 5 or 6 years old, and they moved into Boston, and so she was naturalized. At what age, I don't know. But anyhow, and then on my father's side, my father's father, my grandfather, he was born in upstate New York, and my grandmother was born in County Cork, Ireland. So I'm a mixture of everything. I'm what they call a mongrel. But so that's what the story is. Yeah.
All right, so we touched on this a little bit earlier, but what drew you to the town of Hanson when you moved here?
What's that?
What drew you to the town of Hanson when you moved here?
What? I didn't get you. I don't hear good.
When you moved to Hanson, what drew you to come to this town?
Why did we come to this town? The reason we came to this town is because there was train tracks or steam trains from Plymouth to Boston. And so my father could hop on the train in South Hanson and go to work in Boston and then come home at night, pick up his car. But of course at that time you had we had ration stamps, all right? The government or the town would only give my father 3.5 gallons of gasoline a week, and just to go back and forth to the train station. And I can remember my mother's mother and father, like I say, they lived in Roxbury, and at Christmas time we would always try to go in to my grandmother and grandfather's house for Christmas dinner. And so anyhow, because the car that our family had was a 1936 Pontiac straight 8 engine, all right? And the damn thing didn't get any kind of mileage compared to they probably got 10 miles to the gallon if it was lucky, you know? And so with only 3.5 gallons of gasoline for the week, it wasn't enough to get back and forth to Boston. So anyhow, we heated our house, and we heated the kitchen stove with kerosene. So my father went out in the kerosene tank that was outside and put a couple of gallons of kerosene into the gas tank so we could get to Boston and back. And of course, kerosene doesn't burn as fast as gasoline. And so anyhow, you'd take the old car in, and it'd be huffing and puffing, and black smoke would be coming out of the exhaust and everything else. But we did get back and forth to Boston.
Did you or your family have a business in Hanson?
No, everybody, at that time, it's probably hard for you guys to realize, but at that time, everybody here, especially during the war, they had what they call victory gardens. And what it was is you grew, whatever you grew, you ate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyhow, and of course we had chickens at home, in which we had eggs, and if we had every now and then, when you went to there was only like 3 to 4, maybe 4 markets in the whole town, and they were just small markets. There was one where 58 and the 14 liquor store is now.
Yeah.
That was Walkie's store. And then down in South Hanson, by the railroad station, there was Clark's Market. And then up here and across the street from the funeral home up here, that was the Hanson Public Market.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was another market down on South Street in Montponton Street. Mr. and Mrs. Fernandez had a market there, because at that time there were a lot of people from the islands that lived down there, and she catered to those kind of people.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, that was the only markets. The only other market, there was one in Whitman. There was a First National store,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's a dollar store now. And then there was 2 markets in Rockland, and my parents used to do business with the people in Rockland. But the only thing is, you would get ration stamps. You would have to have a stamp to buy meat and this, that, and the other. So, like I say, we had a lot of chickens in that time period, because that was that was the best market around. You go out to the chicken coop and say, well, who's going to be at dinner today? You know, but anyhow, it was, you'd have to have ration stamps to buy meat, and by the time the train that would come in on my father, when my father came in, was like 6:15. So by the time he got home and he put on regular clothes, because he always wore a white shirt and tie and, business suit. And anyhow, by the time we got over to Rockland, there'd be no meat left anyhow. And you could, there was only so much that you'd go to these places, and it was like when you have hurricanes or bad storms around here, you go down to the market and the shelves are bare. But anyhow, so that's what we did. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. What was your profession?
Well, I started work. I graduated from the 8th grade down at the L.Z. Thomas School.
Oh, yeah,
that was the L.Z. Thomas School there. My first 3 grades were up here in Washington Street School.
Yeah, I think I know. Yep, I know where that is.
That was right up here.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the first 3 grades. Then the 4th grade was the building that the Historical Society has now on Main Street.
Yep.
That was attached by a breezeway to L.Z. Thomas School, where the ballpark is.
Yeah.
Yep.
And anyhow, that was the 4th grade. The 5th grade, I went down to the lower portion of Town Hall. They had a 5th grade there, and they had a 5th grade at L.Z. Thomas. But anyhow, so I was, because in the summertime, there was a fellow, he was a state kid, colored kid, and his name was Bernard Croft. I don't know whatever happened to him, and I think there was a lot of, I'll say, state kids at that time. I don't know whether the parents had separated or one thing or another, but there was a certain number of children in this town that foster parents took care of them until they could either be adopted or whatever the story was. I don't know. But there was this young fellow from down in, I'll say, Pleasant Street, and he came up, and him and I would ride in the summertime, Maytime, April and May, he'd pick me up, and we'd both ride down to Town Hall to go to school.
Yeah.
And but anyhow, then 6th, 7th, and 8th was down at the L.Z. Thomas, and then at that time, people that lived on the Hanover side of Hanson could go to Hanover High School, and most of the people in this town went to Whitman High School.
Yeah.
And my wife was born in Vermont, but they moved to Halifax, and a lot of the Halifax kids went to Whitman High School also.
Yeah.
And then when Silver Lake opened, Silver Lake opened in 1956 was the first year, the graduation year. She was the second year. She graduated in 57. But anyhow, I went to Whitman for a year and a half, and Whitman just didn't go. I didn't get along good. It was a very tough school scholastically to go to school there. My older brother Bob, he just went through. He was on the classical course at the time, and he went through no problem at all. Me, it was like beating my head against the wall. So I switched over, and I went to Quincy Trade School.
Yeah.
And I graduated in Quincy Trade School in 55, and then I went to work for this place. It's where Casale's is, or the Cafe Deli is now, up on Main Street. And it was a Hanson lawnmower shop. And I worked, a fellow by the name of Henry Domestico had it. And I worked there from 55 to 58. And anyhow, he was a nice enough guy, but you couldn't get any money out of him. You know, I figured, but anyhow. So this fella that was instrumental of us coming down from Braintree, he told me that there was a fellow that he knew that had just started a little weekly newspaper in Pembroke, and he was looking for an apprentice to go into the printing business, okay? So I went down and interviewed with him and stuff like that, and I ended up not knowing a thing about printing, getting more money per hour than I was working for the guy at the lawnmower shop. So I went to work there, and anyhow, I worked there, and in 1960, we got married. And anyhow, I worked there until 62. And in 62, there was an opening at the Christian Science Monitor for a printer, because one of the older printers was getting through. So this fellow Frank York said, you ought to go there and interview Donnie, and maybe you can get a job there. And so I'm sure he made arrangements so that he would recommend me, So anyhow, at the time, when I worked for the little newspaper, and it was called the Silver Lake News, and right now it's where the Pembroke Animal Hospital is now. It's the same building, but they've added on to it. Anyhow, so I went in and interviewed it, and I got a job in there, and I worked in the printing department for 10 years. And then back in 72, somewhere around there, printing was changing. Instead of having hot type, metal type, which I worked with, they were going into offset and computerized printing, which they have now. And anyhow, so I just couldn't picture myself looking into a screen all day for setting type and one thing and another like that. So they had an opening down in their basements, I'll say. They had all the crafts that they had a painting